The attack came 3 hours before dawn. Cassian Vale heard them before they breached the outer wall. 5 centuries of existence had sharpened his senses to a predator's edge, and the night spoke to him in languages the living could never comprehend. Footsteps against frozen earth, the whisper of drawn steel, the racing heartbeats of men who believed they were hunters but had not yet realized they were prey. He moved through the corridors of Thornfield Estate with the fluid grace of something that had forgotten how to be human. The ancient stone walls held the cold like a lover's embrace, and shadows bent around him as though recognizing their master. His hand found the pommel of the gladius at his hip, the same blade he had carried as a centurion in the Second Legion, back when Rome still believed it would last forever, back when he had still been a man. The children were already awake. Of course they were. They had learned long ago that safety was an illusion, that every night might be their last. He found them assembled in the great hall exactly as he had trained them, weapons ready, positions taken, young faces set in expressions far too old for their frozen bodies. Clara stood at the high window with a crossbow cradled against her shoulder, 12 years old in body, 16 in mind, with dark hair pulled back in a warrior's braid, and eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. She tracked movement beyond the walls with the cold precision of a practiced killer. Kieran paced near the hearth, all restless energy and barely controlled violence. 10 years old and burning with the need to prove himself, gripping a short sword that seemed too large for his small hands. The boy had died fighting and had never quite learned to stop. Elise sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by hand-drawn maps and tactical diagrams, her 7-year-old face creased in concentration. She had laid out the estate's defenses with the methodical brilliance of a general planning a campaign. Every weakness identified, every advantage marked in careful detail. And Owen, 5 years old and ancient with fear, pressed against the corner with his knees drawn up and his eyes too wide. The newest addition to Cassian's impossible family, still learning that the world held more than hunger and darkness. 12 hunters came over the wall. Cassian counted them through the windows as they spread across the courtyard in a practiced pattern. Professional killers, then, not the usual mob of zealots with torches and scripture. These men moved like soldiers, like men who had learned their trade in harder schools than prayer and prejudice. They wore symbols of the Purification Guild on their armor, silver crosses that caught the moonlight, holy water in vials at their belts, stakes of consecrated ashwood. They came prepared to cleanse the world of monsters, to burn away the unnatural and return the night to human dominion. They had no idea what they were walking into. Cassian turned to his children and spoke in the calm voice of a commander who had led men into impossible battles and brought them home alive. "We hold the inner keep. Testudo formation on my mark. Clara, high ground and pick your targets. Kieran, you anchor the left flank, and for the love of all the gods that abandoned us, do not break formation to chase glory. Elise, you are our eyes. Call every movement. Owen, you stay behind the line and you do not engage. Understood?" 4 voices answered in unison. "Yes, Father." The word still caught in his chest after all these years. Father. He had been many things in 5 centuries. Soldier, killer, monster. But Father was the title that mattered most, the one that had given him something resembling a reason to continue existing. The hunters reached the main doors and began their breach, battering ram against oak and iron. The sound echoed through the halls like a heartbeat, steady and inexorable. Cassian's small garrison assembled in the entrance hall. 23 men, mostly former soldiers who had found their way to his sanctuary over the years. Veterans of border wars and forgotten campaigns, men who knew what it meant to hold a line against impossible odds. They formed up with the discipline of professionals, shields locked, spears ready. The doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Holy water came first, blessed vials shattering against stone. Then burning oil, flames spreading across the floor in hungry rivers. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking, meant to blind and disorient. The hunters poured through the breach like a flood, silver weapons gleaming. Cassian gave the order. Testudo. Shields snapped together in the ancient Roman formation, an interlocking wall of wood and steel. The hunters crashed against it like waves against a cliff face. Spears thrust through gaps in perfect rhythm, finding flesh, driving the enemy back. Blood painted the stones. Men screamed. Clara's crossbow sang from above. Each bolt found its mark with mechanical precision. Throat, eye, heart. She reloaded with practiced efficiency, never rushing, never hesitating. 1 hunter, 2, 3. They fell like puppets with cut strings. Kieran fought on the left flank with the wild ferocity of youth and anger. His blade whirled in patterns Cassian had drilled into him through countless hours of training. The boy was reckless but talented, throwing himself into combat with the abandon of someone who had already died once and no longer feared it. Too reckless. A hunter broke through on the flank, bigger than the others, faster. His silver blade came down in a killing arc aimed at Kieran's exposed neck. The boy saw it too late, froze for a heartbeat that would have been his last. Cassian moved. 5 centuries collapsed into a single moment of absolute clarity. He crossed 15 feet in less than a second, faster than human eyes could track, and caught the descending blade on his gladius. Steel screamed against steel. The hunter's eyes widened in shock as Cassian's free hand closed around his throat and lifted him off the ground as easily as picking up a child. The snap of breaking bone was very loud in the sudden silence. Cassian dropped the body and turned to Kieran. The boy was pale, shaking, staring at the corpse. "Back in formation, now." Kieran stumbled into position. The testudo reformed. The battle continued. Elisa's voice cut through the chaos, high and clear. 2 moving to flank right, 1 circling to the kitchen entrance, 3 regrouping at the breach. Cassian adjusted his line with hand signals. His men moved like pieces on a game board, responding to his commands with the unthinking obedience of perfect training. They collapsed the right flank, reinforced the kitchen approach, held the center. The hunters learned quickly that they had made a terrible mistake. These were not the helpless vampire children of their nightmares. This was not an easy slaughter. This was a fortified position, defended by disciplined soldiers, and a creature that had learned war when their grandfathers' grandfathers were not yet born. The tide turned. Hunters fell back, then broke, then ran. Clara's bolts chased them into the night. The survivors fled over the walls and disappeared into the forest, leaving their dead behind like broken promises. Silence settled over Thornfield estate, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the ragged breathing of wounded men. Cassian surveyed the damage with the methodical eye of a commander conducting after-action assessment. 6 of his men dead, 15 wounded. The entrance hall was a charnel house, blood and bodies painting a story of violence that would take days to fully clean. But his children lived. That was the only calculation that mattered. He found Kieran still standing at his post, sword gripped in white-knuckled hands, staring at nothing. The boy was shaking, trying to hide it, trying to be strong. Cassian knelt beside him and spoke quietly. "Your first real kill?" Kieran nodded, not trusting his voice. "Good. Remember how it feels. Remember the fear and the doubt and the way your hands shake after. Remember, because that feeling means you are still human, still capable of understanding what it costs to take a life. The day you stop feeling it is the day you become the monster they believe you to are." "I almost died," Kieran whispered, "if you had not been there. But I was there, and you will learn from this. You broke formation. You chased glory instead of holding your position. That mistake almost cost your life and endangered everyone who depended on you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Father." Cassian pulled the boy into an embrace, feeling the small body tremble against his chest. "We learn from our mistakes or we die from them. You are still here, still learning. That is enough." The cleanup took hours. Bodies removed, blood scrubbed from stone, wounded tended. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky, Thornfield had returned to something resembling order. Cassian stood in his study and stared at nothing, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders. This was the reality of his existence: constant vigilance, endless warfare, protecting children who would never grow up, never have the chance to be anything more than what they were frozen as on the day they died. How long could he continue this? How many more raids, how many more battles, how many more children could he save before the tide finally overwhelmed him? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." His steward, Blackwood, stepped inside with the careful movements of a man who had learned to be cautious around predators. He carried a sealed letter marked with the crest of the Conclave, the ancient vampire council that ruled their kind with iron discipline. "This arrived by courier an hour ago, my lord. The messenger said it requires immediate attention." Cassian broke the seal and read. The words were formal, couched in the elaborate language of centuries-old protocol, but their meaning was crystal clear. Lord Cassian Vale was summoned to appear before the Conclave at the Silverpine Summit in 7 days' time. Attendance was mandatory. Failure to comply would be considered an act of rebellion. After 200 years of ignoring his sanctuary, the Conclave had suddenly taken an interest in his work. That was never a good sign. Cassian dismissed Blackwood and considered his options. He could not leave the children undefended, not after tonight's attack. The hunters would return, probably in greater numbers, but ignoring a Conclave summons was tantamount to declaring war against the entire vampire nation. He needed help, real help, someone who could protect his children with the same ferocity he did, someone who understood combat and duty and what it meant to stand against impossible odds. Someone expendable enough that the Conclave would not consider them a threat, but capable enough to actually make a difference. The problem was finding such a person before the 7 days expired. 3 days later, Cassian found himself at the Silverpine Summit, surrounded by the elaborate political theater of shifter pack society. The Alpha King's grand hall stretched before him like a monument to excess, all polished marble and gold leaf, filled with the elite of the supernatural world, dressed in their finest and pretending civility, existed between species that had spent millennia trying to exterminate each other. Cassian hated these events with a passion that 5 centuries had not diminished. He stood near the edge of the hall, a predator among predators, and watched the ceremony unfold with barely concealed impatience. Some pack princess was completing her mating bond, another arranged marriage designed to strengthen alliances and consolidate power. The details did not matter. Politics never changed, only the faces playing the ancient games. What mattered was the message he had received that morning. The Conclave representative had arrived early and requested a private meeting. That could only mean trouble. Lord Vale. The voice came from behind him, smooth as poisoned honey. Cassian turned to face Lord Victor, the Conclave's chief enforcer and a vampire so ancient that his exact age was a matter of scholarly debate. Some said 8 centuries, others whispered of 1,000 years or more. Victor wore his power like other men wore clothes, casual and absolute. His face was the kind of beautiful that human artists spent lifetimes trying to capture, all perfect symmetry and cold elegance. His eyes held the flat affect of a creature that had forgotten how to feel anything resembling human emotion. Lord Victor, to what do I owe the pleasure of your personal attention? Victor smiled, showing just a hint of fang. The Conclave has taken an interest in your little sanctuary project. We have questions about the children you harbor, their origins, their potential uses, their ultimate fate. They are not weapons, Cassian said flatly. They are children. Everything is a weapon, Lord Vale. It is simply a matter of finding the correct application. But we are not here to debate philosophy. The Conclave has decided that all vampire sanctuaries must comply with new registration protocols, a complete census of all individuals in your care, along with detailed records of their abilities and limitations. For security purposes, you understand. Cassian understood perfectly. Registration was the first step toward confiscation. The Conclave wanted to know exactly what assets he possessed so they could determine which children would be most useful for their purposes. And if I refuse? Victor's smile widened fractionally. Then you would be in breach of Conclave treaty, a rogue element. Such situations are always resolved with appropriate force. I am sure you understand the necessity. How much time do I have to consider this generous offer? 30 days. The Conclave is nothing if not reasonable. We will send representatives to conduct the census at the end of that period. I trust you will be prepared to receive them. Victor departed with the unhurried grace of a predator that knew it owned the territory. Cassian watched him go and calculated odds that all came up negative. 30 days to prepare for a confrontation he could not win. 30 days to find a solution that did not exist. He needed a miracle. The commotion started near the main entrance, raised voices cutting through the ambient noise of political chatter. Cassian's predator instincts drew him toward the disturbance, always alert for threats, always watching. A crowd had formed around something near the entrance alcove. Cassian moved through them with the ease of someone who did not need permission to go anywhere and found himself looking at a scene that made something in his chest constrict. A vampire child sat huddled in the corner, small and pale and shaking. 5 years old, maybe 6, with dark curls falling across his face and eyes that held the kind of fear that came from knowing the world wanted you dead. He clutched a ragged stuffed animal to his chest, like a shield against the cruelty of existence. The court ladies had backed away, whispering behind their fans. The servants gave the boy a wide berth. No one approached, no one offered comfort. He was a monster after all, a creature of darkness. Better to leave him alone and hope he simply disappeared. Cassian recognized the boy's face from his network of informants. Owen, turned 6 months ago by a rogue vampire who had been killed before he could teach the child anything about controlling the hunger. Owen had been found wandering the forests, half mad with blood craving, attacking animals, and coming dangerously close to attacking humans. Cassian had sent word that he would take the boy, provide sanctuary and training, but the local pack had refused to release him, citing safety concerns and treaty obligations. Now apparently they had brought him here as some kind of curiosity, a monster on display for the entertainment of their betters. It made Cassian's hands curl into fists. He was moving toward the boy when a woman beat him to it. She came from the crowd with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a decision and would not be deterred. Tall for a female shifter, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, and eyes that held the kind of hardness that came from surviving things that should have killed her. She wore fighting leathers instead of formal dress, practical and scarred from use. She knelt beside Owen without hesitation, making herself small and non-threatening. Her voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. "Hello there, my name is Maren. What is yours?" The boy flinched, pressing himself tighter into the corner. But something in her voice, some quality of genuine kindness, made him look up. His eyes were huge and terrified. "Owen," he whispered. "That is a good name, a strong name. How old are you, Owen?" 5. The word caught on a suppressed sob. Maren smiled, and it transformed her hard features into something almost gentle. "I have a nephew who is 5. He gets scared sometimes too. There is no shame in being afraid." Owen stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. No one had spoken to him with kindness since he had died. No one had treated him like he was still a person, still a child who needed comfort instead of a thing to be feared and destroyed. Then his gaze dropped into Maren's hands, and his pupils dilated. Cassian saw it happen, recognized the signs. The hunger rising, impossible to control, overwhelming every other thought. Owen's small fangs extended, and a sound that was half whimper, half growl escaped his throat. Maren followed his gaze to her own hands, and understanding dawned. Without hesitation, she drew a small knife from her belt and made a quick cut across her palm. Blood welled up, bright and red, and the smell of it filled the alcove like a drug. Owen lunged. Cassian moved to intercept, but Maren caught his eye and shook her head fractionally. She held still as the boy latched onto her hand with desperate hunger, drinking in small gulps, his whole body shaking with the relief of finally satisfying the craving that had been tearing him apart. The crowd gasped. Whispers erupted. A servant girl screamed. Cassian reached them in 3 strides and spoke in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade. "What have you done?" Maren looked up at him with calm eyes. He was hungry. "I fed him. That is what you do for children who are starving." "You have just bonded him to you," Cassian said, fighting to keep the horror out of his voice. "He will crave only your blood now. Nothing else will satisfy him. If he cannot feed from you again, he will waste away and die in agony over the course of weeks. Do you understand what you have done?" Maren looked down at Owen, who had stopped drinking and was now curled against her side. The most peaceful Cassian had seen him since the boy had died. She stroked his hair with her free hand, gentle as a mother with an infant. "Then I suppose I had better make sure he can feed from me again." The crowd had grown silent, watching this impossible scene. A shifter woman offering herself as a blood source to a vampire child. It violated every instinct of self-preservation, every treaty and protocol that governed relations between their species. It was also the most selflessly stupid thing Cassian had witnessed in 5 centuries. "We need to speak," he said quietly, privately. Maren nodded. She gathered Owen into her arms, and the boy clung to her like he was drowning, and she was the only solid thing in a world of water. Cassian led them through the crowd to a private antechamber, ignoring the whispers that followed in their wake. Once the door closed behind them, Cassian turned to face the woman who had just created an impossible situation through pure, ignorant compassion. "Tell me your name and your pack affiliation." "Maren Ashford. I am Silverpine-born, former pack enforcer, currently between assignments." Former enforcer. That explained the fighting leathers and the hard eyes. Enforcers were the pack soldiers, the ones who handled threats too dangerous for civilians. They were trained killers, disciplined and lethal. That also meant she was expendable. Enforcers who became former enforcers had usually outlived their usefulness to the pack hierarchy. An idea began to form. How much do you know about vampire children? Not much. They exist. They are dangerous. Most packs kill them on sight. Cassian began to pace, his mind working through possibilities and calculating odds. Owen sat in Maren's arms, already drowsy from the feeding, his small face pressed against her shoulder. She held him with unconscious protectiveness, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Vampire children are a tragedy," Cassian said. "When a child is turned, they are frozen forever at that age. Their bodies never grow, never mature, but their minds continue to develop. Imagine being 5 years old for decades, for centuries, never growing taller, never gaining strength, trapped in a child's body while your consciousness expands into something that can no longer fit." "That sounds like torture," Maren said quietly. "It is. Most vampire children go mad within a few years. They become feral, dangerous to themselves and others. The merciful thing is to end them quickly before that happens. But I believe there is another way. With proper guidance and care, vampire children can retain their humanity. They can learn to survive on animal blood, to control their impulses, to live something resembling a life. I have been providing sanctuary for such children for 2 centuries. How many? 4, including Owen now, apparently, thanks to you." Maren met his gaze without flinching. "Are you angry that I saved him?" "I am angry that you saved him without understanding the consequences. Now you are bound to him. He will need to feed from you regularly, or he will die. You will need to uproot your entire life to accommodate his needs. You have taken responsibility for a creature that may outlive you by centuries, that will never grow up, that will require constant care and feeding. Do you truly understand what you have committed yourself to?" "No," Maren said simply, "but I understand that he is a child, and children should not starve." The simple honesty of it left Cassian momentarily speechless. He studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda, but found only tired determination. This was a woman who had already lost something important and had decided that losing more did not matter as much as doing the right thing. She was perfect. "I have a proposition for you," Cassian said slowly. "But before I make it, you need to understand what I am. My name is Cassian Vale. I am 523 years old. I was turned during the Gothic Wars by a vampire whose name I no longer remember. I spent 3 centuries as an enforcer for the Conclave, the vampire ruling council, until I could no longer stomach the work they demanded. For the past 200 years, I have maintained a sanctuary for vampire children in the far north, beyond the frost line. The Conclave tolerates my existence because I remove a problem they do not wish to acknowledge." He paused, watching her reaction. Maren's expression did not change. She simply waited for him to continue. "The Conclave has now decided they want to register all the children in my care. That is the first step toward taking them, using them. I have 30 days to prepare for a confrontation I cannot win. I need someone who can protect them when I cannot, someone who can fight, someone who understands duty and sacrifice." "You need a soldier," Maren said. "I need a warrior who can become a mother. Owen is bonded to you now. That bond can be extended through a ritual that will make your blood undesirable to other vampires. You would be safe from their cravings. You could move through my sanctuary without fear. In exchange, I need you to serve as combat instructor and defensive coordinator for my household. I need you to teach my children how to survive in a world that wants them dead. What is the compensation? A family, a purpose, and the knowledge that you are protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Maren looked down at Owen, who had fallen asleep in her arms, his small face finally peaceful. She stroked his hair with absent gentleness, and something in her expression told Cassian that she had already made her decision. "Tell me about the other children." "Clara is 16 in mind, 12 in body. She has been with me for 4 years. She is brilliant, angry, and desperate to grow up. She will test you constantly. Kieran is 10. I found him 2 years ago. He died fighting and has never stopped. He is reckless and brave and will get himself killed if someone does not teach him discipline. Elise is 7. She came to me 3 years ago. She barely speaks but thinks more clearly than most adults. She will be the easiest and the hardest of them to understand." "And what about you?" Maren asked. "What kind of father are you to these children?" "The only kind I know how to be. A soldier training soldiers. A monster trying to teach humanity to other monsters. I am not a good man, Maren Ashford, but I am trying to be a good father. That will have to be enough." Maren was silent for a long moment. Then she stood, carefully adjusting Owen in her arms so as not to wake him. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn. The journey takes 3 days. We will perform the blood bond ritual once we arrive at Thornfield. The process is similar to a mating bond in shifter culture. You need to understand that before you agree. We will be connected until one of us dies." "I understand." "Do you?" Cassian stepped closer, letting her see the predator behind the civilized mask. "You will be bound to a monster. Your blood will sustain me. Your life will be forever altered. There is no going back from this. Are you truly prepared to give up everything for children you have just met?" Maren met his gaze without fear. 18 years ago, I lost a child I was carrying. Lost my mate in the same attack. I swore then that I would never let another child suffer if I had the power to prevent it. I have spent nearly 2 decades as a soldier protecting a pack that no longer needs my protection. You are offering me a chance to matter again, to save lives instead of just taking them. Why would I refuse? Because it will cost you everything. I have already lost everything that mattered. Now I want to find something worth protecting." Cassian studied her face and saw the truth of it. This woman was broken in all the same places he was broken. She understood loss and duty and the terrible weight of surviving when you should have died. She would understand his children because she was one of them in all the ways that mattered. "Welcome to the last sanctuary, Maren Ashford. I hope you survive what comes next." The journey north took 3 days through increasingly desolate terrain. They left Silverpine at dawn, Cassian on a black stallion that was as much nightmare as horse, Maren in a supply wagon with Owen curled against her side. The boy had not left her presence since the bonding, following her with the desperate attachment of a child who had finally found something safe to cling to. The landscape transformed around them as they traveled. Lush forests gave way to windswept moors, then to pine forests dusted with early snow. The temperature dropped with each mile until Maren's breath misted in the air, and frost painted intricate patterns on the wagon's wooden sides. Cassian rode beside the wagon and briefed her on what to expect. He spoke in the clipped cadence of a military commander delivering orders, laying out the tactical situation with brutal honesty. Thornfield Estate is a fortress, not a manor. It was built 400 years ago by a vampire lord who understood that power requires defensible positions. The walls are 20 feet high and 8 feet thick. The main structure is stone throughout, with reinforced doors and murder holes at every entrance. I have 23 men under arms, all veterans of various conflicts. They are loyal but mortal. They will die if the Conclave sends sufficient force. "How many would they send?" Maren asked. "Hundreds if they decide we are worth the effort. Perhaps thousands if they wish to make an example. The Conclave commands the largest vampire army in existence. When they move, they do so with overwhelming force. Then how do you plan to survive? By making the cost too high to justify. By being more trouble than we are worth. By defending every inch of ground so fiercely that they decide it is easier to leave us alone than to dig us out. That is the only strategy that has worked for 2 centuries, but it requires absolute discipline and perfect execution. One mistake and everyone dies." Maren absorbed this information with the calm focus of a professional evaluating a combat scenario. No fear, no doubt, just calculation. "What is the most likely attack vector?" "The front gate. It is the obvious choice and the most heavily defended. But we have also reinforced the walls against scaling and created choke points throughout the interior. If they breach, we fall back to prepared positions and make them bleed for every room." "What about siege warfare?" "We can sustain ourselves for 6 months if necessary. We have deep wells, extensive food stores, and a small farm operation within the walls. Time favors the defender in siege situations, but the Conclave has time to spare. We would eventually starve or surrender. Then we need to break sieges before they fully form, hit supply lines, disrupt formations, make them afraid to camp within striking distance." Cassian looked at her with new respect. "You think like a guerrilla fighter. I was trained by the best. Shifter packs survived millennia against superior forces by refusing to fight fair. You hit hard, hit fast, and disappear before they can respond. Never give them a target they can destroy. That will work against conventional forces. But the Conclave employs vampires who are older and faster and stronger than anything you have faced. They can track by scent across vast distances. They can move through darkness like it is their native element. Traditional guerrilla tactics will not be enough. Then we adapt, find their weaknesses, exploit their arrogance. Old things become complacent. They rely on power instead of strategy. That is exploitable. Cassian smiled, showing just a hint of fang. You are going to fit in perfectly. They reached Thornfield estate at sunset on the third day. The fortress rose from the landscape like something out of ancient nightmares, all Gothic spires and weathered stone, surrounded by walls that had been designed to withstand armies. Snow clung to the battlements, and ice glittered in the failing light. Maren studied the structure with a tactician's eye and nodded slowly. Defensible, good sight lines, clear fields of fire. Whoever built this understood warfare. A vampire lord named Constantine. Ironic that I now use his fortress to protect children from the very forces he once served. He would have hated everything I stand for. What happened to him? I killed him. 200 years ago when I took this place. He objected to my appropriation of his property. The gates opened on their approach, and they entered a courtyard that bustled with activity. Soldiers on the walls, servants moving supplies, a blacksmith's forge glowing in the gathering darkness. It looked less like a manor and more like a military installation preparing for war. A severe-looking woman waited by the main doors, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, hard eyes that missed nothing. She studied Maren with obvious skepticism. Mrs. Ashford, Cassian said formally. This is Maren Ashford. She will be taking charge of the children's combat training and serving as defensive coordinator. Maren, this is Mrs. Ashford, my head of household. She runs the domestic operations and keeps this place functioning. Another soldier? Mrs. Ashford's tone suggested this was not entirely welcome news. Very good, my lord. The children are waiting in the East Hall as you requested. Cassian dismounted and helped Maren down from the wagon. Owen clung to her hand, small and frightened in this new place. They walked through corridors that felt more like fortifications than hallways, all stone and iron and defensive positions. The East Hall was a large training room with weapons racked along the walls and practice dummies scattered across the floor. 3 children stood in a rough line, watching their approach with expressions that ranged from hostility to curiosity. Clara stood at attention like a soldier awaiting inspection. Dark hair braided back, a crossbow slung across her shoulders, eyes that belonged on someone 3 times her apparent age. She studied Maren with obvious calculation, already looking for weaknesses to exploit. Kieran bounced on the balls of his feet, unable to stay still. Energy radiated from him like heat from a forge. A short sword hung at his hip, and he kept touching the pommel like he was reassuring himself it was still there. His eyes held the wild light of someone looking for a fight. Elise stood slightly apart from the others, silent and watchful. She held a leather-bound journal and had been sketching something when they entered. Her gaze moved between Maren and Owen with the kind of focused intelligence that missed nothing. Children, Cassian said. This is Maren Ashford. She is a former pack enforcer with extensive combat experience. She will be teaching you advanced tactical combat and defensive strategy. You will treat her with the same respect you show me. Is that understood? 3 voices answered. Yes, Father. The word hit Maren with unexpected force. These children called this ancient vampire Father. This monster who had lived for 5 centuries and killed uncounted thousands had somehow become a parent to broken children that no one else wanted. It was the most heartbreaking and hopeful thing she had seen in 18 years. Clara stepped forward first, chin raised in challenge. You are here to teach us combat? Among other things. I already know how to fight. I have trained for 4 years. Then you can demonstrate what you have learned. Choose your weapon. Clara's eyes gleamed. She moved to the weapons rack and selected a pair of fighting knives. Maren picked up a practice staff, deliberately choosing reach over lethality. The message was clear. I do not need to wound you to win. They circled each other in the center of the hall. Clara moved well, Maren noted. Good balance, confident footwork. She had been trained by someone who knew what they were doing. But there was a tension in her shoulders, a slight overextension in her stance. Anger making her sloppy. Maren waited. Clara attacked with impressive speed, both blades moving in coordinated strikes aimed at disabling rather than killing. But anger made her predictable. Maren deflected the first strike, sidestepped the second, and swept Clara's legs with the staff in one smooth motion. Clara hit the ground hard. Maren's staff hovered over her throat before she could recover. "You are skilled," Maren said calmly, "but you are fighting angry. Anger makes you sloppy. Control your emotions or your emotions will control you." Clara glared up at her, humiliation and rage warring in her expression. Then slowly, deliberately, she took a breath and nodded. Again. They sparred for another 10 minutes. Clara was faster than any human Maren had fought, her vampire reflexes giving her an edge that would have been decisive against a normal opponent. But Maren had 20 years of experience fighting supernatural creatures. She knew how to read momentum and anticipate attacks before they developed. By the end, Clara was breathing hard and sporting several bruises, but her eyes held a new light. Respect. "You are better than I expected," Clara admitted grudgingly, "and you are better than most soldiers I have trained. With discipline, you could be exceptional. Are you willing to learn?" "Yes." Maren turned to Kieran. "Your turn." The boy needed no encouragement. He grabbed his sword and launched himself into combat with reckless enthusiasm. No strategy, no patience, just raw aggression and speed. Maren disarmed him in less than a minute. Kieran stared at his empty hands in disbelief. "You fight like you are trying to die gloriously," Maren said. "Glory is for songs and stories. We are going to teach you how to survive, how to win, how to go home alive at the end of the day. Understand?" Kieran nodded slowly. "Teach me." "I will, both of you. We start training at dawn tomorrow. Be ready." Cassian watched this exchange with something that might have been approval. Then he turned to Elise, who had not moved from her position near the wall. "Elise does not fight the same way," he said quietly. "Show her." Elise stepped forward and opened her journal. The pages were covered in detailed tactical diagrams, troop movements, defensive positions, supply line calculations. Every major battle Cassian had fought in the past year, documented with perfect accuracy and annotated with strategic analysis. Maren stared at the work in stunned recognition. This was military genius. This 7-year-old child understood warfare at a level that most generals never reached. "You did all this?" Elise nodded. She pointed to one diagram and spoke in a voice so quiet Maren had to lean in to hear. 3 weeks ago, Hunter raid. Father put everyone on the walls, but he left the western approach undermanned. If the hunters had known, they could have breached there." She turned to another page. "Last month, supply caravan. Father sent 12 guards. Should have been 15. We were vulnerable for 4 hours. Every page revealed another tactical insight, another weakness identified, another optimization suggested. This child saw patterns that no one else noticed. She understood the mathematics of warfare like it was a second language. "You are going to help me plan our defenses," Maren said. "You and I are going to make this place impregnable. Would you like that?" Elise smiled for the first time. "Yes." The evening passed in strategic discussions. Cassian brought out maps and charts, and they spent hours going over Thornfield's defensive capabilities. Clara contributed tactical observations. Kieran asked aggressive questions about offensive operations. Elise made notes and sketched modifications to existing plans. Owen stayed pressed against Maren's side the entire time, silent and watchful. She kept one hand on his shoulder, anchoring him, and he gradually relaxed into the contact, like a plant turning toward sunlight. By midnight, they had outlined a comprehensive defensive strategy that incorporated guerrilla tactics with traditional fortress defense, layered obstacles, redundant fallback positions, hidden caches of weapons and supplies, everything designed to make an assault as costly as possible. "This will hurt them," Cassian said finally, studying the plans with satisfaction. "This will make them think twice." "The question is whether thinking twice is enough," Maren replied. "We need more than just good defenses. We need something they do not expect, something that changes the fundamental calculation." "What do you suggest?" "I do not know yet, but I will find it. That is what I do." Cassian showed her to her chambers near midnight. The room was spare but comfortable, with a fireplace already burning and thick furs on the bed. Owen followed her inside without question, clearly planning to sleep on the floor beside her bed. "Tomorrow we perform the blood bond ritual," Cassian said from the doorway. "It is similar to a shifter mating bond, but with significant differences. You need to be prepared for what it entails." "I am prepared. You do not know what you are agreeing to." Maren met his gaze steadily. "I am agreeing to protect children who need protection. I am agreeing to stand against forces that want to destroy something good. I am agreeing to matter again after 18 years of feeling useless. What more do I need to know?" Cassian was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Welcome to Thornfield, Maren Ashford. Welcome to the last sanctuary." He closed the door and left her alone with Owen and the weight of choices she could not take back. The blood bond ritual was set for sunset the following day. The ritual chamber lay deep beneath Thornfield, carved from living rock in an age when Rome still ruled the known world. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting shadows that moved like living things across ancient stone. The air tasted of earth and time, and something older than memory. Maren descended the spiral stairs with Owen's small hand clutched in hers, and Cassian's presence a cold weight at her back. Each step took her deeper into a world she did not fully understand, toward a transformation she could not take back. The chamber opened before them like a mouth, circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with symbols carved into the floor in patterns that hurt to look at directly. A stone altar stood at the center, stained with the ghosts of countless rituals performed across centuries. Cassian moved past her to light additional torches. The growing illumination revealed more details: weapons mounted on the walls, ancient armor on display stands, the accumulated history of 500 years of existence, all of it pointing toward this moment. "The blood bond is older than the Conclave," Cassian said without turning. "Older than organized vampire society. It comes from a time when my kind were soldiers first and monsters second. Roman legionnaires would mix blood before impossible battles, binding themselves to their brothers in arms. If one fell, the others would carry his memory. If all fell, they fell together." That sounds like something warriors would create, because it was. The vampiric element came later, when some of us refused to die even when we should have. But the core remains. This is a warrior's oath, a promise that your battles become mine and mine become yours, until death claims us both. He turned to face her, and in the torchlight his features seemed carved from marble, ageless and inhuman and beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful. "There will be pain. The venom I carry will affect you differently than it affects humans. Shifters have resistance, but you will still feel it. Euphoria, disorientation. You may experience memories that are not your own. The boundary between us will blur for a time. How long? Hours? Perhaps a day. You will recover, but the connection will remain. You will always know when I am near, feel when I am in danger, dream my dreams on occasion. It is intimate in ways that most bonds are not." Maren looked down at Owen, who watched the proceedings with wide, solemn eyes. The boy had not left her side since the bonding. He trusted her absolutely, with the uncomplicated faith of a child who had found safety in a world of threats. She had already made her choice. "I am ready." Cassian approached the altar and withdrew a curved knife from his belt. The blade gleamed silver in the torchlight, worked with symbols that matched those on the floor. He made a precise cut across his left palm, deep enough that blood welled up immediately, dark and strange. "Your turn." Maren took the offered knife and mirrored the cut on her own palm. The pain was sharp and clean. Blood, bright red and very human, mixed with the darkness on the blade. Cassian took her hand in his, pressing their wounds together. His skin was cold, corpse cold, but his grip was gentle. He spoke words in a language she did not recognize. Latin, perhaps, or something older. The syllables resonated in the chamber like struck bronze. The world tilted. Pain lanced up Maren's arm, sharp and insistent, like liquid fire injected directly into her veins. She gasped but did not pull away. Cassian's other hand moved to support her as her knees weakened. Then the venom hit. Euphoria crashed over her in waves that made thinking impossible. Colors intensified until the torchlight became almost blinding. Sound amplified until she could hear Cassian's unnecessary breathing, Owen's racing heartbeat, the whisper of air moving through distant corridors, and memories that were not hers. Battlefields under foreign stars, the weight of a gladius in a hand that was not her hand, the screams of dying men whose names she had never known, victory and defeat measured in blood and broken bodies, 5 centuries of warfare compressed into heartbeats that stretched toward eternity. Cassian's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay with me. Do not let it pull you under. Focus on what is real." Maren grabbed onto his voice like a lifeline, forced herself to breathe, to feel the stone beneath her feet and the small hand clutching her dress where Owen had grabbed her in concern. Gradually, the visions receded, becoming whispers instead of shouts. She opened eyes she had not realized she had closed and found Cassian watching her with an expression she could not read. "How do you feel?" "Like I have lived 1,000 years in 1,000 different bodies." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Is it always like that?" "No. The connection should not have been that strong. Shifter blood is supposed to provide resistance to vampiric effects, but you experienced the full force of the bond." "What does that mean?" "I do not know, but we will discover it together." He released her hand and stepped back. The wound on his palm was already closing, vampire healing erasing the damage in seconds. Maren's own cut knitted itself with shifter efficiency, leaving only a thin white line that would fade by morning. "It is done. You are bound to me now, protected from other vampires, safe to move among my children without fear of their hunger." Maren swayed slightly, still disoriented. The chamber seemed too bright and too dark simultaneously. Every shadow held whispers of ancient violence. She could feel Cassian's presence like a second heartbeat, steady and cold and undeniable. Owen tugged at her dress. "Are you okay?" "I am fine, little one, just tired." "We should get you to bed," Cassian said. "The effects will fade, but you need rest." They climbed back through the fortress, Maren leaning more heavily on Cassian's support than she wanted to admit. By the time they reached her chambers, exhaustion had settled into her bones like lead weights. Cassian helped her to the bed and pulled furs over her shaking form. Owen climbed up beside her without asking permission, small and warm against her side. "Sleep," Cassian said quietly. "Tomorrow the real work begins." Maren's last coherent thought before darkness claimed her was that she could still feel him even as he left the room. A cold presence at the edge of her awareness, constant as a North Star. She dreamed of battles she had never fought and blood she had never spilled. Dawn came too quickly. Maren woke to Owen's face inches from hers, the boy having apparently spent the night watching her sleep with the intensity of someone making sure she did not disappear. The bond's after effects had faded to a manageable background hum. She could still feel Cassian somewhere in the fortress, a cold certainty at the back of her mind, but it no longer overwhelmed her other senses. Time to train. She found Clara, Kieran, and Elise already assembled in the training yard when she arrived. The 3 children stood in a rough line, weapons ready, faces set with determination. Behind them, Cassian's garrison watched with obvious interest. 23 soldiers curious to see what this new arrival could teach vampire children about warfare. Maren surveyed her students with a tactician's eye. Clara stood with perfect military bearing, crossbow slung across her back, 2 fighting knives at her belt. Kieran bounced with barely contained energy, short sword drawn and ready. Elise held no weapon but clutched her tactical journal like it was armor. "Today we begin real training," Maren announced, her voice carrying across the yard. "Everything you have learned until now has been preparation. Now you learn to survive. You learn to win. You learn to protect each other, and this place you call home." She walked along the line, meeting each child's gaze in turn. War is not about individual glory. It is not about being the strongest or the fastest or the most skilled. War is about making your enemy so afraid of you that they decide fighting you costs more than it is worth. "We cannot win through strength alone," she continued. "The Conclave has hundreds of vampires, thousands of soldiers. If this becomes a test of raw power, we lose. So we make it a test of will, of determination, of being willing to do what they are not." "What are they not willing to do?" Clara asked. "Bleed for every inch of ground they take. That is our advantage. They are attacking. We are defending. We know this terrain. We choose the ground. We decide where and when they die." Kieran grinned. "I like this plan. You will like it less when you are exhausted and bleeding and wondering why you ever thought fighting was glorious. But you will be alive to wonder, and that is what matters." She spent the first hour drilling basic formations, shield walls, spear lines, coordinated movements that turned individuals into a unified fighting force. Clara picked up the patterns quickly, her sharp mind translating instruction into execution with minimal repetition. Kieran struggled with the discipline required to hold formation instead of charging ahead. Elise absorbed everything and made notes, already identifying weaknesses in their coordination. By mid-morning, Maren shifted focus to guerrilla tactics. She took them into the forests surrounding Thornfield and taught them how to move silently, how to use terrain for concealment, how to strike from ambush and disappear before the enemy could respond. "You are faster than humans," she told them. "Use that speed to hit supply lines and vanish. Never give them a target they can destroy. Make them afraid of every shadow, every tree, every turn in the road." Clara proved to be a natural sniper. Her vampire eyesight gave her accuracy at ranges that would have been impossible for humans. Maren taught her to account for wind and distance, to take the shot that mattered most and then relocate before return fire could find her. Kieran learned hit-and-run tactics, fast strikes with maximum violence, then immediate retreat. His reckless energy became an asset when properly channeled. Maren taught him to pick targets of opportunity, to disrupt and demoralize rather than seeking decisive victory. Elise accompanied them on every exercise, documenting patterns, timing responses, calculating optimal attack vectors. Her mind worked like a siege engine, grinding through variables until she found the solution that maximized damage while minimizing risk. By the end of the first week, they were functioning as a cohesive unit. The second week brought harder lessons. Maren introduced them to pain management, how to fight through injuries, how to keep moving when your body screamed for you to stop. She pushed them to their limits and then pushed further, because the Conclave would not show mercy, and neither could their training. Clara broke first. On the 8th day, after 6 hours of relentless drilling, she threw down her crossbow and screamed at Maren with all the frustration of a 16-year-old mind trapped in a 12-year-old body. "I am trying. I am doing everything you say. Why is it never enough?" Maren let her rage burn itself out. Then she spoke quietly. "Because enough means you survive. Anything less means you die, and everyone who depends on you dies with you. Do you want to live, Clara?" "Of course I want to live." "Then pick up your weapon and show me." Clara stared at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the crossbow and returned to position. The anger remained, but it had direction now, purpose. They trained until sunset, until Clara's hands were blistered and her arms shook from fatigue, until she could barely stand but still managed to hit the target. "Good," Maren said simply. "Tomorrow we do it again." The garrison soldiers watched these sessions with growing respect. This was not the soft training of children playing at war. This was the brutal preparation of soldiers being forged for real combat. Some of the men began joining the drills, matching their skills against vampire reflexes, learning the same tactics. Cassian observed from the walls, silent and evaluating. Occasionally he would descend to offer corrections or demonstrate techniques from his own centuries of experience. The children responded to his guidance with absolute obedience, but Maren noticed they came to her for comfort and reassurance. She was becoming their mother. It happened gradually, in small moments. Owen refusing to sleep unless she was near. Elise showing her new tactical drawings before anyone else. Kieran asking her opinion on sword technique. Clara seeking her out after nightmares to talk about fears she would never voice to Cassian. The weight of it should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The third week brought the discovery that would change everything. Clara found it in the fortress library, buried in texts so old the pages crumbled at her touch. The Dampier Codex, written by half-vampires who had documented the strange space between life and death they inhabited. She brought the book to Maren late one night, her face pale with excitement and terror. "I found something important." The passage she indicated was written in archaic script that took Maren several attempts to decipher. When the meaning finally became clear, her blood went cold. Shifter blood, when consumed regularly by a vampire, does not sustain their curse, but rather reverses it. The damned may reclaim mortality through prolonged exposure to the essence of transformation. The process is gradual, taking months or years depending on the vampire's age, but inevitable. They become human once more. Maren read it 3 times to be certain she understood. Then she looked at Clara's desperate face and understood why the girl had brought this to her first. "If this is true," Clara whispered, "we could be cured. We could grow up, have normal lives, die natural deaths instead of this endless frozen existence." "Have you shown this to Cassian?" "No. I wanted to ask you first if you thought it was real or just legend." Maren thought about the blood bond, about how Cassian had said her resistance to his venom should have been stronger, about small changes she had noticed in him over the past weeks. He seemed more present somehow, more engaged with the world, less like a walking corpse and more like a living man. "I think it might be real." Clara's hands shook as she gripped the ancient book. "If we tell him and it is true, we could start the cure immediately. But what if it does not work? What if it makes things worse? And even if it works, the transformation would take months. The Conclave is coming in less than 3 weeks. If Father becomes human during the siege, we lose our strongest defender. You are thinking tactically. That is good. But there is another consideration. If the Conclave learns that shifter blood can cure vampirism, what do you think they will do? Clara's eyes widened with understanding. They would suppress it, or weaponize it. Force cures on vampires who do not want them, use it as punishment or control. Or they would hunt down every shifter they could find to study how it works. Your cure becomes my people's extinction. They sat in silence, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them. We tell Father, Clara said finally. He deserves to know, but we keep it secret from everyone else until we understand what it means. Agreed. But Clara, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this is not as simple as we hope. Cures often come with costs. I know, but I am tired of being 12 forever. If there is even a chance, I have to try. They brought the codex to Cassian an hour later. He read the passage in silence, his expression unreadable. Then he set the book down and stared at nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. If this is true, it changes everything. You have noticed changes in yourself? Maren asked. Cassian nodded slowly. Small things. I have been attributing them to age or stress. But if this text is accurate, it would explain the symptoms. Increased appetite for regular food, sleeping when I should not need sleep, a certain sluggishness in my reflexes that I assumed was fatigue. How long? Clara asked. How long would the full transformation take? For me? At least 6 months, possibly longer given my age. For you, perhaps 3 or 4 months. You have been vampire for a shorter time. The curse has not set as deeply. And during that time, Maren pressed, what happens to your abilities? They would fade gradually, speed decreasing, strength diminishing. Eventually, I would be fully human again, mortal, vulnerable. Clara leaned forward, but free. You would be free of the curse that has imprisoned you for 5 centuries. Is that not worth any cost? Cassian looked at her with something that might have been longing. Yes, if circumstances were different. But the Conclave arrives in 19 days. If I begin this transformation now, I will be weak when they come, unable to defend what matters most. Then we defend you, Clara said fiercely. We hold the line while you transform, and when you are human again, we start curing the rest of us. We prove it can be done. The tactical situation is impossible, Cassian replied. We are already outnumbered. Losing my combat effectiveness makes our odds go from poor to non-existent. Maren had been running calculations while they spoke. Now she voiced the conclusion she had reached. We do not try to cure you before they arrive. We use the cure as a political weapon. Both vampires turned to stare at her. Explain, Cassian said. The Conclave wants to register your children so they can control them, but if we prove the cure exists, we change the entire conversation. Vampire children are no longer permanent threats that must be managed. They are temporary conditions that can be resolved. The justification for Conclave control disappears. Clara caught on immediately. We cure me first, fast as possible. When the Conclave arrives, I am human, living proof that it works. They cannot claim we are dangerous monsters if I am standing in front of them as a mortal girl. It is a huge risk, Cassian said. If the transformation goes wrong, if you suffer complications, if they do not believe the evidence, then we fight anyway, Clara interrupted. We were always going to fight. This just gives us a weapon they do not expect, a way to win without everyone dying. Cassian looked at Maren. What do you think? I think Clara is right. We need an advantage the Conclave cannot counter. This might be it. But there is another consideration. If you start transforming Clara now, you commit to feeding her regularly from me. That means less blood available for you. Your own transformation might begin whether you intend it to or not. Then I accept that cost. Clara's freedom is worth my vulnerability. Father, Clara whispered. The word held a universe of emotion. Cassian reached across and gripped her shoulder. You deserve to grow up, to live a full life. If there is any chance of giving you that, I will take it, no matter what it costs me. They began Clara's cure the next morning. Maren made a precise cut across her wrist and held it out to the girl. Clara hesitated for only a moment before drinking. The taste was apparently strange, not quite blood, something altered by the shifter nature that made it different from human. When Clara pulled back, her fangs were already beginning to retract slightly. Subtle changes, barely noticeable, but undeniably there. Over the next week, they established a routine. Clara fed twice daily from Maren, controlled amounts, carefully monitored. Each feeding brought incremental changes. Her skin grew warmer. Her reflexes slowed fractionally. Her appetite for regular food increased. By day 5, she had grown half an inch. By day 8, her fangs were normal human teeth. By day 10, she could stand in sunlight without discomfort. The transformation was working, but it was also affecting Cassian. With less of Maren's blood available for their bond maintenance, his own symptoms accelerated. He moved slower, tired more easily, began eating full meals instead of token bites. On the 12th day, he fell asleep during a war council meeting. Maren found him afterward, slumped in his study chair, breathing with the deep rhythm of genuine sleep. She shook his shoulder gently until his eyes opened, confusion and alarm warring in his expression. "How long was I asleep?" "An hour, maybe more." Cassian stood abruptly, nearly falling as his legs failed to respond with their usual vampiric coordination. That cannot happen. Not now. Not with the Conclave arriving in 7 days. You are transforming whether you want to or not. Clara is taking enough of my blood that you are not getting enough to maintain your vampire state. Then we stop her treatment. No, we accelerate it. If we can finish Clara's cure before the Conclave arrives, you can resume regular feeding from me. Your transformation will slow or stop. That gives us 1 week to complete a process that should take months. It could kill her. Or it could save all of us. Clara is strong. Let her choose. They presented the option to Clara that evening. She did not hesitate. Do it, whatever it takes. I'm not afraid. For the next 6 days, Clara fed almost constantly. Maren's wrist bore a permanent wound that her shifter healing struggled to close. The girl drank until she was gorged, slept briefly, then drank again. Her body fought to process the massive influx of transformative essence, aging visibly with each passing hour. It was brutal to watch. Clara's body stretched and changed, growing 4 inches in as many days. Her features matured, losing the round softness of childhood. Her voice deepened. Her mind, already 16, finally found a body that matched. But the cost was severe. She suffered fevers that left her delirious. Pain racked her changing frame. She vomited blood and shook with convulsions that terrified everyone who watched. Maren stayed with her through every moment, held her through the worst of it, whispered encouragement when Clara begged them to stop. On the 13th day since they had begun, Clara woke as the sun rose and stood on legs that had not worked properly since she was 12 years old. She walked to the mirror in her chambers and stared at the reflection. A 16-year-old girl stared back, dark hair falling past her shoulders. Features that would have been beautiful if not hollowed by recent suffering, but human, completely, undeniably human. Clara touched her face with trembling hands. Then she turned to Maren and Cassian and smiled through tears. "I am real again." Cassian pulled her into an embrace that looked like it was the first time in 4 years he had been able to hold his daughter properly. Clara clung to him and sobbed, all the fear and pain and desperate hope of her frozen years pouring out. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me my life back." The celebration was short-lived. That evening, a scout rode in with news that turned their victory into ashes. The Conclave vanguard had arrived early. The 30-day deadline that Victor had imposed still had 7 days remaining. But the ancient vampire had apparently decided that waiting served no purpose. His forces were 2 days out. 50 vampire soldiers led by Victor himself, moving with forced march speed to catch Thornfield unprepared. They had run out of time. The War Council convened immediately. Every soldier in the garrison, every capable fighter, maps spread across tables, weapons checked and rechecked. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the electricity that comes before battle. Cassian stood at the head of the table, and everyone could see how much he had changed. He moved like a man now, not a supernatural predator. His skin held color it had not possessed in centuries. When he gripped the table's edge, his knuckles showed white with very human tension. Victor arrives with 50 elite soldiers in 2 days. We were given 30 days to comply with registration. We are on day 23. He has come 7 days early, hoping to catch us unprepared. We have 23 men and 3 vampire children, 4 if you count Clara, though she is now human and untrained in her new body. The tactical situation is impossible by any conventional measure. "So we do not fight conventionally," Maren said. "We make them bleed before they reach our walls. Guerrilla strikes, ambushes, hit their supply train and their scouts, make them afraid to sleep." Thorn, the blacksmith who had served under Cassian in ancient campaigns, nodded agreement. Make them earn every mile. They will arrive exhausted and demoralized if we do this right. Cassian turned to Elise. Show them. Elise unrolled a detailed map of the terrain between their current location and the Conclave's approach vector. She had marked optimal ambush points, supply cache locations, and retreat routes with the precision of a master tactician. 3 primary engagement zones, she said in her quiet voice. First contact here in the narrow pass. Force them to bunch up. Clara takes high ground with the crossbow. Kill their officers first. I can do that, Clara said. Her voice was steadier than it had been in days. Elise continued. Second engagement here, at the river crossing. They will expect an ambush, so we give them one. Small force, loud and visible. While they are focused on that, Kieran leads a team to burn their supply wagons. Kieran grinned. I am very good at burning things. Third engagement is the difficult one. Within sight of Thornfield. We need them to see our walls and know that taking them will cost everything they have. Father leads the defense there with the full garrison. We hold that line absolutely. And if they break through? One of the soldiers asked. Maren answered before Cassian could. Then we fall back to prepared positions inside the fortress and make them clear every room. They will drown in their own blood before they reach the children. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. A fighting retreat through Thornfield would be a massacre. Most of them would not survive it. But the children would. That was all that mattered. They spent the next 2 days in frantic preparation. Traps set along approach routes, weapons sharpened, armor checked. Every man wrote letters to be delivered if they did not survive. The atmosphere was grim but determined. Owen stayed close to Maren through all of it, small and frightened but trying to be brave. She made time to reassure him, to promise that everything would be all right, even though she could not be certain. On the evening before the Conclave's expected arrival, Cassian found her on the walls, watching the northern horizon where their enemies would appear. You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. So should you, but neither of us will. He stood beside her in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. I have been thinking about what you said, about making them afraid. There is something we have not tried, something that might give us an advantage. What? Guerrilla warfare works because the enemy never knows where the next attack will come from. But there is a psychological component as well. Fear is contagious. If we can make them believe we are more dangerous than we actually are, they will hesitate, and hesitation is exploitable. You want to fight them in the dark. Use terror as a weapon. Exactly. Vampires see darkness as their element. They think they own the night. But I have 5 centuries of experience fighting in conditions that would drive most creatures mad. And you are a shifter. Your wolf form is built for night hunting. You want us to become the monsters they are afraid of. I want us to be what they accuse us of being. Nightmares made real. If they fear us enough, they may decide we are not worth the cost of destroying. It was brutal logic, the kind of thinking that won wars at the cost of souls. But Maren had stopped worrying about her soul 18 years ago. Tell me what you need me to do. They attacked the Conclave vanguard 3 hours before dawn on the second day. The vampire soldiers were making camp in a clearing, confident in their numbers and their supernatural abilities. They had posted guards, but not enough. They believed themselves to be the predators in this scenario. They were wrong. Maren struck first. Wolf form. Pure darkness moving through shadows with perfect silence. She took the first sentry from behind, jaws closing on his throat before he could cry out. The vampire turned to ash before the body hit the ground. The second sentry died the same way. Then the third. Clara's crossbow sang from the tree line. Silver-tipped bolts punched through vampire flesh with surgical precision. 1 shot, 1 kill, reload, another target. She worked with mechanical efficiency, dropping enemies before they could locate her position. Kieran led a team of garrison soldiers in a howling charge from the eastern approach. Not a real attack, just noise and fury designed to draw attention. The vampire soldiers responded predictably, forming ranks to face the apparent threat, which left their western flank completely exposed. Cassian hit them like a storm. Even weakened by his transformation, 5 centuries of combat experience counted for everything. His gladius wove patterns that had been ancient when Rome fell. He moved through vampire ranks like death itself, killing with brutal efficiency. The Conclave soldiers broke. Veterans with decades of experience fled into the forest, terrified of enemies that struck from shadows and disappeared before they could retaliate. Lord Victor rallied them with shouted commands, but the damage was done. By the time the vanguard regrouped and formed defensive positions, they had lost 12 soldiers, and all their supply wagons were burning. Cassian stood at the edge of the firelight and let Victor see him. Let the ancient vampire understand exactly who he was facing. Then he disappeared back into darkness. The vanguard did not sleep that night. They huddled around fires and jumped at every sound. When dawn finally came, they looked exhausted and frightened. Phase 1 complete. The second engagement came at the river crossing. Victor had learned from the first attack. He sent scouts ahead, maintained tight formations, kept his soldiers on high alert. It did not matter. Elise had predicted his response with perfect accuracy. The ambush she had planned accounted for increased vigilance. A small force made noise and showed themselves, drawing the Conclave's attention. Victor ordered his soldiers to assault the visible position, confident he was crushing a desperate last stand. He did not notice Kieran's team circling behind until it was too late. The remaining supply wagons went up in flames. The Conclave's reserve weapons were destroyed. Their food stores were scattered. Kieran's team melted into the forest before Victor could organize a pursuit. Now the vanguard was exhausted, frightened, and undersupplied. They were winning the tactical engagement, but losing the psychological war. Victor made the only choice available. He ordered a forced march to Thornfield. If they could take the fortress quickly, they could resupply there. But marching exhausted troops into battle against a fortified position was desperation masquerading as strategy. Cassian watched them approach from Thornfield's walls and allowed himself a grim smile. They are exactly where we want them. The final engagement began at midday. 50 vampire soldiers, reduced to 38 by ambushes and attrition, approached Thornfield Estate and saw walls that had been designed to withstand armies, murder holes, reinforced gates, clear fields of fire. They saw 23 human soldiers on those walls, standing in formation with weapons ready. They saw Cassian Vale, looking more human than vampire, waiting at the gate with a gladius that had tasted blood for 5 centuries. They saw a fortress that would consume them if they tried to take it. Victor called for parley. Cassian descended from the walls and met him in the no-man's land between armies. Maren accompanied him in human form, sword at her hip, eyes scanning for treachery. "Lord Vale," Victor said with false courtesy, "this unpleasantness has gone on long enough. The Conclave's terms are simple. Surrender the children for registration and evaluation. Submit to our authority. This ends peacefully." "No." The single word hung in the air like a sword. Victor's expression hardened. "You have fought well. I grant you that. But you cannot win. My full force numbers 300 vampires. This vanguard is merely the beginning. Refuse our terms and I will return with overwhelming force. Everyone you protect will die. Then you will have to kill us all. Because I will never surrender children to an organization that sees them as weapons to be controlled. They are abominations, mistakes. They should never have been created. They are children, and I will protect them with my last breath." Victor studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to Maren. "You are the shifter, the one who bonds vampires to prevent their hunger. Clever solution to an impossible problem. But tell me, does it concern you that your blood is changing him? That he is becoming less of what makes him useful?" Maren smiled without humor. "He is becoming more of what makes him human. That is worth any cost." Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Human, as though that is something to aspire to. Mortality, weakness, death. You would trade immortality for that?" "In a heartbeat," Cassian said quietly, "and I can prove it." He gestured toward the walls. Clara appeared at the battlements, standing tall in the sunlight, fully human, undeniably alive. "That child was vampire 4 weeks ago. Now she is mortal. I have found the cure, Victor. Shifter blood reverses the curse. Every vampire child can be saved, can grow up, can live normal lives and die natural deaths." Victor's face went perfectly still. "Impossible. You are looking at the proof, which means your entire justification for controlling these children has disappeared. They are not permanent threats. They are temporary conditions that can be resolved. The Conclave has no legitimate authority over them." "If what you say is true," Victor said slowly, "then you have created something far more dangerous than vampire children. You have created hope, and hope is the most destructive force in existence." "Is that a threat?" "It is a promise. If this cure becomes public knowledge, it will destabilize everything. Vampires who want to die will seek you out. Those who do not will feel threatened. The Conclave will fall into chaos as factions war over whether mortality should be forced or forbidden. You have lit a fuse that will burn down our entire civilization." "Good," Cassian said. "Your civilization is built on suffering. Let it burn." Victor drew his sword. "Then we end this now." The battle that followed was brief and brutal. Victor attacked with the speed and strength of 8 centuries of existence. Cassian met him with the skill of 5 centuries and the desperate determination of a father protecting his children. They fought in the shadow of Thornfield's walls while both armies watched. Maren wanted to intervene, but Cassian had forbidden it. This was between them, between what Victor represented and what Cassian had become. The duel was not close. Victor was stronger, faster, more powerful in every measurable way. But Cassian was fighting for something Victor had forgotten how to value. He was fighting for family, for the right of children to have futures, for the belief that redemption was possible even for monsters. Victor's blade found Cassian's shoulder. Blood flowed, red and human. Cassian did not slow. His gladius found Victor's throat. Once. Twice. The ancient vampire staggered backward, shock written across his perfect features. "How are you still standing?" "Because I have something worth dying for. You have only eternity." Cassian's next strike took Victor's head from his shoulders. The ancient vampire crumbled to ash that scattered in the wind. 8 centuries of existence ended in the space between heartbeats. Cassian turned to face the remaining Conclave soldiers. His shoulder wound bled freely. He swayed on his feet. But his voice carried absolute authority. "Your commander is dead. You can retreat now and report to the Conclave that Thornfield is defended. Or you can attack and die on these walls. Choose quickly." The vampire soldiers looked at each other. Then one by one, they withdrew. They had seen their ancient commander fall. They had lost comrades to guerrilla attacks. They had no desire to throw themselves against walls that would grind them to dust. Within minutes, the field before Thornfield was empty. The siege was over before it truly began. Cassian made it back through the gates before his legs gave out. Maren caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. Blood loss and exhaustion, and the accumulated cost of days without proper feeding, had finally overwhelmed him. Clara was at his side immediately, her newly human hands pressing against his wound. "Father, stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," Cassian murmured. "Just need to rest." They carried him to his chambers, and Maren fed him directly, opening a vein and letting him drink until color returned to his face and the wound began to close. The vampire healing was slower now, impaired by his transformation, but still functional. When he woke hours later, the first thing he saw was his 4 children gathered around the bed, Clara human and radiant. Kieran exhausted but grinning, Elise clutching her tactical journal. Owen pressed against Maren's side where she sat keeping vigil. "We won," Kieran said. "You killed Lord Victor. Everyone saw it." Cassian sat up slowly, testing his body's responses. "We won the battle. But the war is just beginning. When the Conclave learns what happened, they will send more, possibly hundreds. Then we will be ready," Clara said firmly. "And we will have something they cannot fight against. Hope. The knowledge that vampires do not have to be monsters forever, that we can be saved." "She is right," Maren added. "Word will spread. Vampires who want freedom will come to us. The Conclave will fracture. Their power is built on maintaining the curse. The cure destroys that foundation." Cassian looked at the faces surrounding him and felt something he had not experienced in 5 centuries. Not hope exactly, something deeper, purpose beyond mere survival. "Then we prepare for what comes next. We fortify, we train, we offer sanctuary to any vampire child who needs it. And we prove that redemption is possible even for creatures born in darkness." 2 weeks passed in reconstruction and planning. Thornfield's garrison was reinforced by volunteers who had heard rumors of Victor's death. New defenses were constructed. More vampire children arrived, refugees from places where they were hunted. The sanctuary was growing. Clara began her transformation into something more than just a survivor. She traveled to nearby settlements and spoke openly about her cure, about the possibility of freedom from the vampire curse. Her words spread like wildfire through supernatural communities. Kieran took charge of combat training for newly arrived children, teaching them the same brutal lessons Maren had taught him. He had found his purpose as a warrior and instructor. Elise established an intelligence network, coordinating information gathering across multiple territories. Her tactical mind had found an outlet that utilized her genius fully. Owen remained close to Maren, but he was less fearful now, more confident. He had seen battle and survived. He was learning that safety was something you fought for, not something given freely. And Cassian. Cassian continued his transformation, each day more human, each day further from the monster he had been. His hair showed the first hints of silver at the temples. His eyes held warmth they had not possessed in centuries. One evening, Maren found him on the walls watching the sunset with an expression she had not seen before. "You are smiling. I am watching the sun set. 500 years of darkness, and now I can stand in twilight without burning. Small pleasures feel enormous after so long without them. The Conclave will retaliate, you know that." "Yes. But we have proven something they believed impossible. We have shown that vampires can be saved. That transformation is possible. Whatever happens next, we have changed the conversation forever." Maren stood beside him and felt the blood bond humming between them. Constant, unbreakable. A connection that had become something more than mere survival. "What do we do when they come in force?" "We fight, we hold this sanctuary, and we save every child we can. That is enough purpose for whatever time we have left." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Inside the fortress, children laughed over dinner. Soldiers told stories of the battle. Life continued in defiance of every force that wanted to extinguish it. The last sanctuary stood, and it would continue standing as long as anyone remained willing to defend it. The war was far from over, but for tonight, they had won the right to hope. The messenger arrived at dawn 3 weeks after Victor's death. She came alone, riding a horse that looked half dead from exhaustion, carrying a sealed letter marked with the crest Cassian had not seen in 2 centuries. Lady Seraphine, one of the Conclave's oldest members and Victor's longtime rival, was requesting immediate audience. Cassian read the message twice, searching for hidden threats or deceptions. Found only a simple statement that chilled him more than any overt hostility could have. "The Conclave is fracturing. Civil war is inevitable. I am coming to you because I believe you may have something worth dying for. Expect me within 2 days." He called a war council immediately. The command center had evolved over the past weeks from a simple meeting room into a proper military headquarters. Maps covered every wall, marking known Conclave positions, supply routes, potential threats. Elisa's tactical diagrams grew more sophisticated daily. Intelligence reports from their expanding network of informants arrived hourly. Thornfield had become the beating heart of something larger than a simple sanctuary. It had become the center of a revolution. Maren stood at the main table with Clara at her right hand, the girl having taken naturally to strategic planning now that her mind finally had a body capable of executing its ideas. Kieran lounged against the wall, deceptively casual, but with eyes that tracked every movement in the room. Elise sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers, her small face creased in concentration. Owen remained close to Maren always, but he no longer hid behind her. The boy who had been terrified of his own shadow 3 months ago now stood straighter, watched more carefully, learned from everything he witnessed. Cassian shared Seraphine's message and waited for reactions. "It is a trap," Kieran said immediately. "Ancient vampires do not ask for meetings. They take what they want." "Maybe," Clara countered, "but if the Conclave is truly splitting, we need allies. Fighting a united Conclave is suicide. Fighting half a Conclave while the other half fights itself gives us actual odds." Elise spoke without looking up from her maps. "Lady Seraphine is 800 years old. She commands 60 personal guards plus unknown additional forces. If she arrives in 2 days, she is already close, probably watching us already. The question is not whether to meet with her, but how to survive the meeting if it goes badly." Maren studied the terrain maps, running scenarios. "We fortify the meeting location, multiple escape routes, overwatch positions. If this turns into an ambush, we make them pay for every step." "And if she is genuine?" Cassian asked. "If she truly wants alliance? Then we gain a powerful friend and divide our enemies. That is worth considerable risk." They spent the rest of the day preparing, not just for a meeting, but for potential battle. Every soldier was briefed, every weapon was checked, defensive positions were reinforced. If Seraphine came with hostile intent, she would find Thornfield ready to bleed her forces white. But Cassian suspected something different was happening, something potentially more dangerous than simple warfare. Hope was spreading, and hope was the most volatile substance in existence. Lady Seraphine arrived precisely when her message had promised, at midday 2 days later. She came with an escort of 20 vampire soldiers, all bearing weapons but moving with discipline rather than aggression. They approached Thornfield under a white flag, following protocols so ancient most had forgotten their origin. Cassian met her in the same field where he had killed Victor. Maren accompanied him, wolf senses alert for any sign of treachery. Clara insisted on coming as well, living proof of what Cassian had achieved. Seraphine dismounted with the fluid grace of extreme age and advanced alone. She was tall for a woman, with silver hair that fell to her waist and eyes that held the weight of 8 centuries. Beautiful in the way that ancient things are beautiful, worn smooth by time until nothing unnecessary remained. Lord Vale. Her voice carried the music of dead languages, pronunciations that had not been heard in living memory. I thank you for agreeing to meet. I am uncertain whether agreeing is the correct word when the alternative is preparing for siege. Seraphine smiled faintly. Fair enough. Then let me be direct. Victor's death has accomplished what 2 centuries of careful politicking could not. The Conclave is tearing itself apart. Half believe you must be destroyed for defying our authority. The other half sees opportunity in what you have created. And which half do you represent? Neither. I represent a third option that most have not yet considered. Complete dissolution of the Conclave's power structure. Return to older ways when vampires were independent rather than organized. Freedom instead of control. That sounds like revolution. It is revolution, one that has been brewing for centuries. Victor's death simply provided the spark. Now I need to know something crucial before I commit my forces to this cause. Ask. Is the cure real? Cassian gestured to Clara. See for yourself. Seraphine approached the girl slowly, studying her with the intensity of a scholar examining a rare manuscript. She inhaled deeply, testing scent, reached out to touch Clara's hand, feeling warmth and pulse. How long were you vampire? 4 years. Clara answered steadily. 12 years old in body, 16 in mind. Lord Vale found me and gave me sanctuary. 3 weeks ago I began drinking shifter blood regularly. 10 days of accelerated transformation. Now I am fully human. I can stand in sunlight, eat regular food. I will age naturally and die a mortal death. And you wanted this? To give up immortality? I was not immortal. I was frozen. There is a difference between living forever and being unable to die. I chose life over existence. Seraphine was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to Cassian. How many can you cure simultaneously? That depends on available shifter blood. Currently we have 1 donor. Maren can safely sustain perhaps 2 transformations at a time without serious health risks. With more shifter volunteers, we could expand capacity significantly. If I brought you 50 vampire children, could you cure them all? Eventually. It would take months. Perhaps a year, but yes. What about adult vampires who want the cure? Those of us who have lived too long and wish to end on our own terms rather than fading into madness. The process would be slower for ancient vampires. Your curse has set deeper, but theoretically possible. Seraphine looked at him with something that might have been longing. I am 800 years old, Lord Vale. I have watched empires rise and fall, seen wonders that no longer exist and horrors that still haunt me. I am tired. So deeply tired that some nights I can barely remember why I continue. If you could give me mortality, give me the chance to grow old and die like humans do, I would pay any price you asked. I ask no price, only that you help protect this sanctuary and the children who need it. Then you have my loyalty, my soldiers, my resources, everything I possess in service of the cure. There is something you should know first, Maren interjected. The Conclave will never accept this. If we succeed, if word spreads that vampires can be cured, your entire power structure collapses. They will send armies, hundreds of soldiers, maybe thousands. Are you prepared for that level of warfare? I spent 3 centuries building the Conclave's military capacity. I know exactly what they are capable of. That is why I am here. Because you cannot win alone, but together we might have a chance. Cassian studied the ancient vampire's face, searching for deception, found only weary determination. How many soldiers do you command? 60 personal guards, another 200 who are loyal to me rather than the Conclave. Not enough to defeat their full strength, but sufficient to divide their attention. If we force them to fight on multiple fronts, we create opportunities. For what? For other vampires to choose sides. For those who want freedom to join us. for the entire rotten structure to collapse under its own weight. You are talking about civil war on a scale that will consume the entire vampire nation. Yes, and it is long overdue. The Conclave has ruled through fear and control for too long. Time to tear it down and build something better from the ruins. Cassian looked at Maren. She met his gaze and gave a slight nod. They had discussed this possibility, prepared for it. The question was whether they were ready to commit. Very well, Cassian said. Alliance. Your forces combine with ours. We defend this sanctuary and offer the cure to any vampire who seeks it. But I have conditions. Name them. No forced cures. Vampires who wish to remain immortal have that right. This is about choice, not compulsion. Agreed. Any vampire children who come here receive sanctuary regardless of political affiliation. We do not turn away those who need help. Of course. And when this is over, when the Conclave is defeated or dissolved, the sanctuaries remain independent. No new power structure replaces the old one. Vampires govern themselves as individuals, not as a collective. Seraphine smiled. You are more idealistic than I expected, but yes, those terms are acceptable. Then we have alliance. Welcome to the last sanctuary, Lady Seraphine. They sealed the agreement in the old way, mixing blood and speaking oaths that bound them as surely as any written contract. When it was done, Seraphine's forces merged with Thornfield's garrison, swelling their numbers from 23 soldiers to nearly 300. Suddenly they were not a desperate last stand. They were an army. The work of integration began immediately. Seraphine's vampires were professional soldiers with centuries of experience. They had fought in more wars than Maren could count, against enemies both human and supernatural. Their addition transformed Thornfield from a fortified manor into a genuine military installation. But integration brought challenges. Many of Seraphine's soldiers were old, not just chronologically but temperamentally. They had spent centuries following orders without question, killing without hesitation. The concept of a sanctuary that protected the weak and offered redemption to monsters was foreign to them. Some adapted quickly, others struggled. Maren found herself constantly mediating disputes. Ancient vampires who saw the children as weaknesses to be eliminated. Garrison soldiers who feared their new allies more than their enemies. The delicate balance of trust required constant maintenance. One incident nearly broke everything. A vampire named Corvus, one of Seraphine's oldest soldiers, was discovered attempting to feed from Owen. The boy was unharmed, protected by the blood bond, but terrified. Corvus claimed it was instinct, that the child's fear had triggered his predatory response. Cassian's judgment was swift and absolute. The soldier was given a choice. Accept exile or accept the cure. Remain vampire and leave forever, or become human and stay. There would be no third option. Corvus chose exile. He departed within the hour, and his choice sent a message that rippled through the combined forces. Thornfield had rules. Break them and face consequences. Protect children or get out. After that, integration proceeded more smoothly. Elise took charge of coordinating the expanded intelligence network. With Seraphine's resources added to their own, they now had informants in every major Conclave stronghold. Information flowed constantly, painting a picture of an organization eating itself from within. The Conclave had split into 3 factions. The Hardliners, led by Lord Magnus, demanded absolute destruction of Thornfield and execution of anyone associated with the cure. They commanded approximately 400 soldiers and had the backing of the oldest, most conservative vampires. The Reformists believed the cure should be studied and controlled but not destroyed. They wanted to harness its power for Conclave benefit. They commanded roughly 300 soldiers and represented younger, more pragmatic vampires. The revolutionaries, now openly allied with Seraphine, wanted complete dissolution of Conclave authority. They believed vampires should govern themselves as individuals. Their numbers were smallest, perhaps 200, but growing daily. The mathematics were brutal. Even with Seraphine's alliance, they faced combined enemy forces of 700 soldiers. Thornfield's garrison, even expanded, numbered only 300. The odds were still impossible, unless they changed the nature of the conflict. Clara proposed the strategy that would define everything that followed. She brought it to this war council on a cold evening 2 weeks after Seraphine's arrival. Snow had begun falling, early even for the northern territories, dusting the fortress walls with white that glowed in the torchlight. "We cannot win through combat alone," she stated without preamble. "The numbers do not work. Even with superior defensive position and tactical advantage, we will eventually be overwhelmed." "We are all aware of this," Cassian said gently. "What is your proposal?" We turn this into a political conflict instead of a military one. We force the Conclave to fight each other rather than us. Explain. Clara unrolled a map marked with Conclave territories. Right now, we are the target. Everyone agrees we must be destroyed. They just disagree on method and timing. But what if we change the equation? What if we made it impossible for them to unite against us? How? I travel to the Conclave capital under flag of truce. I testify before their full council about the cure. I show them that I am human, alive, free. I force them to confront the fact that their entire system of control is built on maintaining a curse that can be broken. That is suicide, Karen said flatly. They will kill you the moment you arrive. Not if I go with sufficient escort. Not if I go publicly with dozens of witnesses. The Conclave rules through law and protocol. They cannot simply murder a diplomatic envoy without losing all credibility. Clara is correct, Seraphine added. The Conclave capital operates under ancient rules of hospitality and diplomatic immunity. They may despise her message, but they cannot kill the messenger without violating their own founding principles. And what happens after you testify? Maren asked, assuming they let you leave alive? Then I have done what Victor feared most. I have given them hope. Some will seek the cure immediately. Others will resist violently. The reformists and hardliners will turn on each other. Civil war becomes inevitable. You are proposing to sacrifice yourself to spark a larger conflict, Cassian said quietly. I am proposing to weaponize the truth. Yes, it is dangerous. Yes, I might die. But if I succeed, we transform this from a war we cannot win into chaos where everyone loses except us. The room fell silent as they absorbed the audacity of the plan. Use one teenage girl as a catalyst to collapse an empire that had ruled for a millennium. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. I will not order you to do this, Cassian said finally. The risk is too great. You are not ordering me. I am volunteering. This is my choice. My life to risk for the cause we all serve. Cassian looked at her for a long moment, saw not the 12-year-old child he had found 4 years ago, but the 16-year-old woman she had become. Strong, determined, willing to sacrifice everything for what she believed in. He was so proud it hurt. Very well. But you do not go alone. We send a diplomatic mission, proper escort. Witnesses who can testify to what happens. If the Conclave violates diplomatic immunity, they prove themselves to be exactly what we claim they are. I will lead the escort, Maren said. 20 soldiers, mixed human and vampire, enough to provide security but not enough to be threatening. I should go too, Seraphine added. I still have rank within the Conclave. My presence legitimizes the mission. Then it is decided. We have 1 week to prepare. Clara, you will need to practice your testimony. Every word matters. We get one chance at this. The next 7 days passed in intense preparation. Clara worked with Seraphine to craft testimony that would be both truthful and devastating. They identified key council members who might be swayed, crafted arguments for each faction, prepared responses to every likely objection. Maren drilled the escort team until they moved as a single unit. They practiced rapid deployment, defensive formations, emergency extraction protocols. If this went wrong, if the Conclave decided to violate every diplomatic protocol and attack anyway, they needed to be ready. Kieran wanted desperately to be part of the escort. Cassian refused. If something happened to Clara, if she was killed, someone needed to remain who understood what she had been fighting for, someone who could continue the work. The boy accepted the logic but did not like it. On the evening before departure, Cassian called Clara to his study. Father and daughter sat across from each other in comfortable silence for a long moment. You have become everything I hoped you could be, Cassian said finally. Strong, intelligent, brave. I am honored to have been your father. You are still my father. This is not goodbye. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if they decide diplomacy matters less than silencing you, then I will have died free, human, with agency over my own choices. That is more than I had when you found me, more than most vampire children ever get. Cassian reached across and took her hand. It was warm, fully human, no trace of the cold corpse flesh she had possessed for 4 years. I love you, he said simply. I know, and I love you. That is why I am doing this, not just for me, for every child like I was, for everyone trapped in a curse they did not choose. This is worth the risk. They sat together until dawn, talking about the past and the possible future. When the time came to leave, Clara embraced her father tightly, then walked out to face what might be her death with her head held high. The diplomatic mission departed at first light. 20 soldiers, Clara riding at the center, wearing simple but dignified clothes. Maren and Seraphine flanking her, representing shifter and vampiric interests. A white truce banner flying above. The journey took 5 days through hostile territory. Twice Conclave patrols stopped them. Both times, Seraphine's rank and the truce flag saw them through. On the 6th day, they reached the capital. The city sprawled across 3 mountain peaks, connected by soaring bridges and carved from living stone. Thousands of vampires called it home, along with human servants and various supernatural creatures who had sworn fealty to Conclave authority. It was magnificent and terrible, a monument to power built on centuries of subjugation. The Conclave chambers stood at the highest peak, a massive structure that seemed to grow from the mountain itself. 12 towers surrounding a central dome where the council conducted its business. Guards watched from every wall, weapons ready, eyes tracking the diplomatic mission with obvious hostility. They were admitted through the main gates and escorted to a waiting chamber. The space was designed to intimidate, all soaring ceilings and ancient tapestries depicting Conclave victories over rebellions that had dared to challenge their authority. Clara sat calmly, reviewing her testimony one final time. Maren stood watch by the door, every sense alert for threat. Seraphine spoke quietly with various council members who came to assess the situation. Finally, after 3 hours of delay, they were summoned to the council chamber. 12 elevated seats held the Conclave's ruling members, ancient vampires whose combined age exceeded 10,000 years. At the center stood a platform where those addressing the council stood alone. Clara walked to that platform without hesitation. Lord Constantine, who led the hardliner faction, spoke first. His voice dripped contempt. "You stand before this council as a proven rebel, an associate of traitors who have violated our most sacred laws. By rights, you should be executed immediately. The only reason you still breathe is diplomatic protocol that many of us believe you do not deserve. Speak quickly, and pray your words have value." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I am Clara Vale. 4 years ago, I was turned into a vampire at age 12 by a rogue who abandoned me to starve. Lord Cassian Vale found me and gave me sanctuary. Under his protection, I learned to survive on animal blood, to retain my humanity despite the curse." "We know your history," Constantine interrupted. "Tell us something we do not know or stop wasting our time." 3 weeks ago, I completed a transformation I was told was impossible. Through sustained consumption of shifter blood, my vampirism was reversed. I became fully human again. I stand before you now as living proof that the curse can be broken, that vampires can be cured. The chamber erupted. 12 ancient voices rose in discord, some shouting denial, others demanding details, still others calling for immediate execution to prevent the knowledge from spreading. Constantine hammered for order, but chaos reigned for several minutes. Finally, silence was restored. Constantine's face was rigid with fury. "You claim to be cured. Prove it." Clara walked to the nearest window and threw open the heavy curtains. Afternoon sunlight flooded the chamber. She stepped directly into the beam and stood bathed in light that would have set any vampire ablaze. "I have a heartbeat," she continued calmly. "I eat regular food. I age naturally. In 60 or 70 years, I will die of old age like any human. The curse that imprisoned me for 4 years is gone. I am free." "If what you say is true," a reformist council member said slowly, "then you have created something of immense value. The Conclave would be very interested in controlling access to such a cure." "The cure cannot be controlled," Clara replied. "It requires willing cooperation between vampires and shifters. It takes months of sustained effort. It cannot be forced or weaponized. It can only be offered freely to those who want it." "Then it is a threat that must be eliminated," Magnus declared. "If vampires can become human, our entire power structure collapses. Immortality is what separates us from the cattle we feed upon. Remove that, and we become nothing." "Or we become free," Clara shot back. "Free to choose our own paths, free to end our existence with dignity rather than fading into madness. You call it loss of power. I call it liberation." "You are a child," Magnus sneered. "What do you know of power, of the responsibility of ruling, of maintaining order across centuries? I know that your order is built on the suffering of those like me, vampire children frozen forever, trapped in bodies that cannot grow, adults who want to die but cannot. All of you imprisoned by a curse that we now know can be broken. How many more centuries will you maintain this system simply because changing it threatens your authority? The question hung in the chamber like a blade. Enough, Magnus said coldly. This council will deliberate. You and your escort will be held pending our decision. Guards, take them to secure quarters. We came under flag of diplomatic truce, Seraphine said, rising from her observer seat. To detain us violates every protocol this council was founded upon. Protocols can be suspended in times of crisis, and I declare this a crisis. 20 guards moved to surround Clara and her escort. Weapons were drawn. The message was clear. Diplomatic immunity only extended as far as Constantine chose to recognize it. Maren's hand moved to her sword. The escort team tensed, ready to fight. They were outnumbered 20-1, but they would sell their lives dearly. Clara spoke before violence could erupt. We will comply, but let the record show that Lord Magnus has violated the very laws he claims to uphold. History will remember this moment. They were escorted to a fortified tower and locked inside with guards posted at every exit. Not quite prisoners, not quite guests, something in between that satisfied no one. For 3 days they waited while the Conclave deliberated. Intelligence filtered in through channels Seraphine had maintained. The council was fragmenting exactly as Clara had predicted. The reformists wanted to study the cure, control it, use it as a tool of governance. The hardliners demanded its complete destruction. The revolutionaries saw opportunity in the chaos. Debates became arguments, became threats. Ancient alliances shattered. New factions formed and dissolved. The Conclave, which had ruled with absolute authority for a millennium, was tearing itself apart. On the third night, everything changed. The guards outside their door died silently. Professional kills, throats cut before they could raise alarm. The door opened to reveal Lady Seraphine's most trusted lieutenant. We are leaving. Now. Lord Magnus has ordered your execution. The vote was 7-5. They plan to move against you at dawn. How do we get out? Maren asked, already moving. Servant passages. They run through the entire city. We reach the outer wall, then ride hard for Thornfield. Constantine will send pursuit, but we will have hours of head start if we move immediately. They moved through servant passages, narrow and dark, leading away from main corridors. Seraphine's network had mapped every route. They reached the outer wall. Horses waited, saddled and ready. They were mounting when alarm bells rang. Someone had discovered the dead guards, minutes before every exit sealed. Ride, Seraphine commanded. Do not stop for anything. They rode through the night. Behind them, pursuit grew. Dozens of riders, then scores. The Conclave committed everything to stopping them. Dawn found them in open country with pursuit closing fast. Horses exhausted, soldiers bleeding. They could not maintain pace. That was when Cassian arrived. He came from the north with 200 soldiers, his timing perfect, positioning flawless. The ambush caught pursuers by surprise. The battle was brief and brutal. Cassian's forces held superior ground. Pursuit shattered, survivors fleeing. Clara dismounted and ran to her father, throwing herself into his arms. They held each other while around them soldiers tended wounds and counted casualties. It worked, she said, voice muffled against his chest. The Conclave is fracturing. Civil war is inevitable. We changed everything. You nearly died, but I did not. And now the whole world knows the cure is real. Vampires across every territory will seek it out. The revolution has begun. Cassian held her tight and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had actually won something permanent. The journey back took 4 days. Intelligence confirmed Clara's hope. The council had dissolved into warfare. Magnus led hardliners against reformists. Revolutionaries declared independence. The vampire nation was at war with itself. Vampires seeking the cure traveled toward Thornfield from across the world. The sanctuary was becoming a movement. But movement attracted attention. 2 weeks after Clara's return, scouts reported massive troop movements. Lord Magnus had apparently decided that regardless of civil war, Thornfield must be destroyed. He was marching with 300 hardliner soldiers, determined to eliminate the cure's source. The final battle was inevitable. Cassian assembled his forces and surveyed what they had built. 300 soldiers of his own, mixed human and vampire. Fortifications that had been reinforced constantly over months. Defenders who believed absolutely in what they were protecting. And at the center of it all, 50 vampire children who represented hope itself. The defensive plan was comprehensive. layered obstacles designed to bleed attacking forces at every stage. Cassian would anchor the main gate with the heavy infantry. Maren would lead guerrilla teams to harass flanks and supply lines. Kieran commanded the mobile reserve, ready to plug gaps in the line. Clara insisted on fighting despite having no combat training in her new human body. Cassian tried to refuse. She reminded him that she was an expert marksman and the symbolic heart of what they were protecting. If she fled while others died defending her, everything they stood for became meaningless. He relented. She would fight from the walls, well protected but visible, a living reminder of why they struggled. Elise coordinated overall strategy from the command center, her tactical genius providing real-time adjustments as the battle developed. Owen remained with her, too young to fight, but old enough to understand what was at stake. Magnus's army arrived at dawn on a cold morning when frost painted everything white. They came in disciplined formation, 300 vampire soldiers marching behind banners that had flown for centuries, professional killers who had crushed countless rebellions. They had overwhelming confidence and superior numbers. They believed they would sweep Thornfield aside like dust. They were wrong. The first wave hit the outer defenses and discovered that every approach was a killing ground. Cassian had spent months preparing these positions, and they functioned exactly as designed. Channeled the enemy into predetermined fields of fire, forced them to advance through obstacles that robbed them of speed and cohesion. Clara's crossbow sang from the walls, each bolt claiming a life. Kieran's mobile forces hit flanks at precisely calculated moments, disrupting formations before fading back. Maren led wolf-pack raids that destroyed supply wagons and killed officers. The attackers paid in blood for every foot of ground, but they kept coming. Magnus drove them forward with the absolute authority of ancient power. Casualties mounted on both sides. The outer defenses fell after 3 hours of sustained assault. Then the middle ring. Slowly, inexorably, Thornfield's defenders were pushed back toward the inner keep. By midday, the battle had devolved into savage close combat on the walls themselves. Cassian fought like the warrior he had been before vampirism had twisted him into something else. His gladius, that ancient blade that had tasted blood across 5 centuries, found enemy flesh with grim efficiency. He was slower now, more human, but skill and experience counted for everything. Magnus came for him personally as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The ancient vampire moved through combat like death incarnate, cutting down defenders with contemptuous ease. 800 years of existence had made him something beyond normal vampiric power. He was elemental force given form. He found Cassian on the eastern wall and smiled with anticipation. Victor was weak, sentimental. You killed him because he hesitated. I will not make the same mistake. Their duel was nothing like the one with Victor. That had been combat between relative equals. This was a massacre. Magnus was faster, stronger, more skilled. Every clash of blades drove Cassian backward. Within minutes he was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His gladius, that weapon that had served him for centuries, shattered against Magnus's ancient blade. Cassian fell to his knees, disarmed and dying. Magnus raised his sword for the killing blow, and Kieran hit him from behind. The boy came from nowhere, moving with full vampiric speed, driving a spear through Magnus's back with every ounce of strength he possessed. The ancient vampire staggered, more surprised than injured, turned to deal with this insect who dared interrupt his kill. That moment of distraction was all Maren needed. She struck from wolf form, 300 pounds of primal fury crashing into Magnus's chest. Her jaws closed on his throat, fangs that had been designed to kill vampires finding purchase. They went down together in a tangle of violence. Magnus was stronger. He threw her off, rose to his feet despite terrible wounds. But now he faced not one opponent but dozens. Every defender within reach converged on him, recognizing that killing their enemy's leader might break the assault. They dragged him down through sheer weight of numbers. He killed 6 more before someone managed to stake him through the heart. When he finally crumbled to ash, a cheer went up from the defenders. The hardliner forces, seeing their commander fall, lost cohesion. Some continued fighting with desperate fury. Others began to retreat. Within an hour, the assault had collapsed entirely. Survivors fled into the growing darkness, leaving behind nearly half their number dead on Thornfield's walls. The final battle was won. The cost was terrible. 70 soldiers dead, twice that number wounded. The walls were scarred by fire and siege weapons. Bodies lay everywhere, friend and foe mixed in the democracy of death. But Thornfield stood. The children lived. The cure remained available to any who sought it. They had earned their victory through blood and sacrifice. And somehow, impossibly, it was enough. The aftermath stretched across months. With Magnus dead, the hardliner faction collapsed. Reformists negotiated with revolutionaries. The Conclave dissolved. What replaced it was looser, more democratic. Vampire children arrived at Thornfield in steadily increasing numbers, from Conclave facilities, from hiding, all seeking the cure. Maren worked to exhaustion providing blood for transformations. Other shifters volunteered. Month by month, vampire children became human children who would grow and age naturally. Clara became an ambassador, traveling to speak about her transformation. Her testimony convinced countless vampires to seek the cure. Kieran found his calling as combat instructor, teaching newly cured children self-defense. Harsh but effective. Elise established a sanctuary network across territories, her genius ensuring the cure spread widely. She remained vampire by choice, coordinating across decades. Owen stayed with Maren, gradually building courage for his own cure. Content to wait, to remain a child longer. He had time. Cassian continued his transformation into full humanity. His hair went completely silver. Lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. He aged visibly month by month, mortal time reclaiming what vampirism had stolen. He found he did not mind. One evening, 18 months after the final battle, he stood on Thornfield's walls, watching the sunset, something he could never have done safely as a vampire. The sky burned with colors that seemed more vivid now that he knew his time to see them was limited. Maren joined him, and they stood in comfortable silence for a while. "Do you regret it?" she asked eventually. "Trading immortality for this?" "Never. 500 years of existence taught me that time without purpose is not life. It is just waiting to fade. These past months, knowing that every day counts, that I will age and eventually die, this is the first time I have felt truly alive since Rome fell. The children have started calling you grandfather. I know, it is terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. You have built something permanent, something that will outlast you. That is legacy." Cassian looked across the courtyard where children played, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Some were still vampire, working through transformations at their own pace. Others were fully human, growing and changing daily. All of them were safe, protected, given a chance at futures they had been told were impossible. "Legacy," he repeated. "Yes, I suppose it is." That night, he gathered his family for dinner. Not just the original 4 children, but dozens more who had found sanctuary at Thornfield. The great hall was crowded and loud and chaotic in the way that family gatherings always are. Clara told stories about her diplomatic missions. Kieran demonstrated a new combat technique he had developed. Elise presented plans for expanding the sanctuary network. Owen sat close to Maren and occasionally contributed shy observations. Cassian sat at the head of the table and felt something he had not experienced in 5 centuries. Contentment. The simple satisfaction of work well done and people worth protecting surrounding him. He was not immortal anymore. He would age and eventually die. But what he had built would continue. The children he had saved would grow up and save others in turn. The cure would spread until every vampire who wanted freedom could have it. That was enough, more than enough. 3 years after the final battle, Maren discovered she was pregnant. The news should have been impossible, but prolonged exposure to vampire blood through the bond had healed old wounds. When the baby came, a daughter with Cassian's features and Maren's determination, they named her Hope. 2 years later, a son arrived. Haven. Cassian held his biological children with the same fierce protectiveness he showed his adopted ones. He was 65 physically when Seraphine completed her transformation, 800 years ending voluntarily. She remained at Thornfield, teaching others what to expect. "This is good," she told Cassian. "This ending we chose. There is dignity in this." 5 years after the final battle, Thornfield celebrated its 100th cured vampire child. The celebration lasted 3 days. What had started as one man's desperate attempt had become a movement that transformed their species. The Conclave officially recognized Thornfield's sanctuaries as independent and vital. The cure was declared a fundamental right. 7 years after the final battle, Cassian sat in his study surrounded by family. Clara, with her own children, Kieran aged to 20, master at arms, Elise still 7, coordinating long-term projects. Owen 10, beginning training. Hope and Haven played at Maren's feet. "Tell us a story, Father," Hope demanded. "Tell us about the war." Cassian looked at her young face, innocent and safe, and decided which version of the truth to share. Once there was a monster who had forgotten how to be human. He lived alone for so long that he stopped remembering why life mattered. Then one day he found a child who needed help, then another, then more. Each one showed him a piece of humanity he thought he had lost forever. "And he saved them?" Haven asked. "No," Cassian said softly. "They saved him, by giving him a reason to fight, by reminding him that protecting the helpless matters more than living forever. They gave him a family, and family is worth any cost." "Even if you die?" Hope asked with a child's blunt directness. "Especially if I die, because what we built will continue. You will continue. And generations from now, people will remember that monsters can become men if they work hard enough, that curses can be broken, that redemption is always possible if you are brave enough to seek it." He looked around the room at the faces he loved. Some were still vampire, some were human, some were his by blood, others by choice. It did not matter. They were all his family, all under his protection for however many years his mortal existence had remaining. "That is enough," he said quietly. "More than enough." Outside, snow continued to fall across Thornfield's walls. Guards walked their rounds with discipline learned through survival. In the dormitories, vampire children slept safely, some dreaming of the day when they too would be cured. The sanctuary stood against the darkness, a light that had been lit by one desperate act of defiance and grown into a beacon visible for hundreds of miles. The last sanctuary endured, and it would continue enduring long after Cassian was gone. That was legacy. That was victory. That was earned. End of Part 3. Epilogue. 20 years later, an old man walked the walls of Thornfield Estate and surveyed a world transformed. Cassian Vale was 85 years old, gray and weathered, and deeply satisfied with the life he had lived. His gladius hung at his hip more from habit than necessity. The wars were over, the battles won. Below him, the sanctuary bustled with activity. 200 vampire children in various stages of cure, being taught by instructors who had once been children themselves. Maren ran operations with the same fierce competence she had always possessed, silver touching her dark hair but strength undiminished. Their children, Hope and Haven, had grown into remarkable adults. Hope worked as a diplomat like Clara, spreading knowledge of the cure to distant territories. Haven had become a scholar, documenting the transformation process so that knowledge would never be lost. The original 4 children remained close. Clara had aged naturally, now in her 30s with children of her own. Kieran was a legend among combat instructors, still teaching though his own children would soon take over. Elise had finally accepted the cure last year, choosing to grow up at last. Owen was 17 physically, training to become a sanctuary administrator. More than 3,000 vampires had been cured across the network of sanctuaries. The number grew daily. What had been thought impossible was now routine. Curse-breaking had become a science, refined and improved by constant practice. The vampire species had transformed. Many chose to remain immortal, and that was their right. But those who wanted freedom could have it. Choice had replaced compulsion. Individual liberty had replaced collective control. It was not perfect. It was not paradise. But it was better than what had come before, and it would continue improving as long as people fought to make it so. Cassian felt his heart labor in his chest. The end was approaching, probably sooner than later. His doctor told him to rest more. His family told him to let others handle the sanctuary's operations. He ignored them all. He had spent 5 centuries doing nothing. His remaining years would be spent in useful work. Maren found him on the walls at sunset, as she often did. They stood together watching the light fade, comfortable in the silence of long partnership. "Tired?" she asked eventually. "Always, but content." "You changed the world, Cassian." "We changed it, all of us together, one desperate decision at a time, one saved child, one offered cure, small actions that accumulated into something transformative. That is legacy. Yes, that is legacy." The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Cassian watched it sink and felt at peace. He had lived well, fought for things that mattered, protected those who needed protection, built something that would outlast his mortal span. 543 years of existence, first as monster, then as man, all of it leading to this moment, standing on walls he had defended, surrounded by family he had chosen, watching the sunset on a world he had helped transform. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The end.